Hey there. We're going deep today, all about GIT. Especially for you, actually. You sent us this document all about the GIT version control system, and well, we're here to break it down for you, make it all make sense. Ever use track changes on a document? Think of GIT like that, but way more powerful. For huge software projects, where lots of people are working together.
Yeah, it's crucial for collaboration. I mean, Can you imagine trying to combine everyone's work on a massive project without version control? It would be chaos. You'd be overwriting each other's code constantly.
Oh, totally. Like trying to force puzzle pieces together from different puzzles.
Well,
okay, so the document jumps right into VCS and SCM, which I learned are just short for version control system, right? But what's the big deal? Why should anyone care about this stuff?
Because in today's world, software development's a team sport. The document really emphasizes that, the collaborative nature of projects. And GIT is like the playbook for that teamwork. It's about keeping track of every little change to the code. So you can rewind to older versions, compare them, even fix mistakes without having to start from scratch.
Ooh, so it's like a safety net, A&D, a time machine for your code. I like it. I'm definitely intrigued, but some of the terms are still a little fuzzy. What exactly is a repository?
Think of it as the project's central hub. All the files, the entire history of changes, it's all there in the repository, like a master vault for your code.
Okay, so that's the ultimate backup. And then there's the stat working copy thing, which is basically your own space.
To mess with the code, right?
Exactly. Your sandbox to play around in before you merge your changes back into the main project.
Gotcha. So I'm tinkering away in my sandbox, making changes. But then how do I let everyone else know what I've done? Like, hey, check out this cool thing I did. The document mentions commits.
Yeah, that's the heart of GIT. A commit is like taking a snapshot of your changes at that moment. It's basically saying, this is a set of changes that make sense together. And this is where it becomes more than just like track changes, It's about actively documenting what you're thinking as you develop the software.
Oh, absolutely. Each commit should have a clear message explaining what you changed and why you changed it. Helps your future self and your teammates to understand the evolution of the code.
Okay. So, I'm making these commits locally. But at some point, I got to share it with the team, right? That's where push comes in.
Right. Git push sends your committed changes to the remote repository, making them accessible to everyone else.
And on the other side, git pull grabs the latest changes from that repository and brings them to my local copy.
Yeah.
So it's like syncing up with everyone else.
Exactly. And this constant syncing through push and pull is what makes true collaboration possible. Everyone stays up to date, even when they're working on different parts of the project.
Okay, so we've got this central hub, our personal sandboxes, and a way to share changes back and forth. But then the document goes into this branching concept, which sounds a little intimidating, to be honest.
I know, it sounds scary, but it's actually pretty intuitive. Imagine a tree trunk, representing your main code base. Branches sprout off from it, allowing developers to work on different features or ideas simultaneously.
So it's like having multiple versions of the project running at the same time. Wouldn't that get confusing?
Well, that's where the power of GIT really shines. The document actually calls branches secondary development paths. They're designed to keep things organized. Think of it this way. One team could be working on a new feature while another team is fixing bugs, all without interfering with each other or the main code base.
Okay, so it's like having separate drafts for different parts of a book. That makes sense. But then how do you bring those branches back together?
That's called merging, and it's one of the most important parts of working with GIT.
Okay, let's dig into that. But before we do, I'm curious, what happens if two people make changes to the same part of the code, but on different branches? Oh, that's got to be a recipe for disaster. Like, whose changes win?
Well, that's where conflicts come in. And they're more common than you'd think. The document actually gives a pretty good example. Basically, GIT flags that section, the one that's conflicting. And then it's up to the developers to decide how to combine those changes.
So it's not like some magical AI figures it all out. There's still like a human element.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. GIT gives you the tools.
Yeah.
But it's human judgment that actually resolves the conflict. You have to compare the different versions, understand what each person was trying to do, and then make a decision that keeps code working.
Okay, so it's like a negotiation process. I'm starting to see how GIT requires communication and collaboration, even beyond just, the actual writing code part.
Exactly. It forces you to think about the bigger picture
Yeah.
and make sure everyone's on the same page.
So we've got these branches. We're merging them, hopefully, resolving conflicts along the way. But what if I totally mess something up? Like I make a change and it breaks everything. And I just want to go back to how it was before.
Oh, well, in that case, revert is your best friend. Think of it as the time machine for your code. You can undo a previous commit. It's essentially stepping back to an earlier version.
So like an undo button for coding. That sounds incredibly useful, especially when you're like experimenting or trying to fix a tricky bug.
It really is. It lets you experiment without the fear of permanently breaking something, you know?
Yeah.
You can always revert back to a known good state if it goes south.
Okay, that's a huge relief. Speaking of experimenting, the document mentions this feature called stash, which sounds intriguing.
Stash is like having a temporary shelf for your code. Imagine you working on something, but you need to switch gears quickly, right? Address a bug or versus work on a different feature. You can stash your current changes without committing them.
So it's like hitting pause on your work without losing anything. That's really useful when you have to like juggle multiple things at once.
Yeah, exactly. It lets you context switch without cluttering your working copy or making, half-baked commits. You stash your changes, work on that urgent task, and then come back to your stash changes later. Pick up right where you left off.
Wow, GIT really is like a Swiss Army knife for developers.
So many tools.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that this incredibly complex system came out of necessity. The document mentions Linus Torvalds and his work on the Linux kernel.
Right. Back in 2005, Torvalds and his team were using a proprietary version control system called BitKeeper, but they hit a snag and lost access to it.
Oh, no. So what did they do? Just give up on version control?
Well, Torvalds, being Torvalds, decided to create his own version control system. And that's how he got GIT. He wanted a system that was distributed, efficient to go, and could handle a massive project, like the Linux kernel.
Talk about taking matters into your own hands. That's inspiring that one person's frustration led to something as impactful as GIT. It really shows the power of open source software. GIT embodies that, the collaboration, sharing knowledge. Torvalds could have kept it proprietary, but he chose to make it open, available to everyone.
And that's had a huge impact. I mean, GIT is basically the standard now, right, for version control.
Yeah, pretty much. Used by tons of developers all over the world. And it keeps evolving, adapting to the needs of the community. It's a living system.
So we've covered a lot. Repositories, commits, branching, stashing. But I still have this question. How does this all work in a real-world scenario? Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's say we're building a mobile app. We've got designers, front-end developers, back-end developers, all working together. Each person has their own local copy of the project repository, their own sandbox.
Right, so they're all using those commands like get add and get commit.
Exactly. And throughout the day, they're pushing their changes to the remote repository and pulling the latest updates from their teammates.
And if they need to work on a new feature, they can create their own branch.
With Git branch. Right. That way they can work independently without messing with the main code base. And when they're ready, they merge their branch back in using Git merge.
And if there are conflicts, GIT helps them resolve those.
Exactly. It's all about communication and coordination. Having a system that lets everyone work efficiently without stepping on each other's toes.
So it's not just the technical commands, it's about the workflow.
Precisely. GIT provides the framework, but it's the human element that makes it powerful. The teamwork, the communication.
That's a good point. GIT empowers collaboration, but it's up to the team to use it, right?
Definitely. Like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's up to the developers to communicate clearly, define their strategy, make sure everyone understands the workflow.
I'm seeing that. GIT is about so much more than version control. It's like a whole philosophy of development, a way of thinking about collaboration.
I like that. And that's why it's had such a big impact. It's not just a tool. It's a catalyst for better teamwork, more efficient development.
It's really interesting how GIT went from being a solution to a specific problem to this like ubiquitous tool that's shaping how we build software.
It's the power of innovation and open source collaboration, and who knows what the future holds.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to dive deeper into GIT.
That's great. There are tons of resources out there, tutorials, documentation, communities. You can learn from other GIT users.
I'm ready to commit to becoming a GIT master. Okay, I'll stop at the puns.
Your enthusiasm is great.
I am excited. Thanks for helping me understand all this in a way that's approachable.
You're very welcome.
But before we wrap up, are there any common pitfalls that people new to GIT should know about?
That's a good question. One common pitfall is not writing good commit messages. It's tempting to just rush through that part. But those messages are important for understanding the history of your code.
Right, like writing a good logbook.
Exactly. Another misconception is that GIT is only for big projects. While it's great for teams, it can also be useful for solo projects. It gives you that safety net, a way to track your progress and experiment.
So even if you're working alone, GIT can still help you manage your code.
Absolutely. The earlier you start using GIT, the better.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm feeling much more confident about GIT now.
That's great. Remember, it's a journey. There's always more to learn. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's great advice. So we've covered the essentials, the applications, even the philosophy behind GIT. What's next?
Well, I think it's time to turn the focus back to you, our listener.
Yeah, let's bring it back to our listener and their goals. You sent us this document about GIT to, really get a handle on it. So let's try to put it into practice. What's like one specific project you're working on right now?
Yeah, anything. A coding project, maybe. A design you're revising. Even planning a big event.
Okay, so imagine you're using these GIT principles. Maybe not the actual commands, but the ideas behind them. For that project, could it help you stay organized, work more efficiently?
That's the challenge. How could version control, even without the GIT commands, make things run smoother? Maybe you start keeping different versions of your work clearly labeled. Or you think about how to branch out different aspects of the project, work on them separately, then bring them back together.
That's a cool way to think about it. It's not just about code anymore. It's about managing any kind of complex project. Makes me think about all the times I've lost track of changes or wished I could go back to an older version of something.
Exactly. It's like having a time machine for your creative process.
I can definitely see how this would be helpful. Thanks for broadening my perspective beyond just the technical stuff.
Of course. And remember, that document you sent is a great place to start. If you want to learn more about GIT,
this whole deep dive has been great. I used to think GIT was super technical, just for, serious programmers. But now I see how the ideas behind it can apply to so many different things.
It's about clarity, collaboration, and having the confidence to experiment, knowing you can always go back.
Yeah, those are good skills to have no matter what you're working on. Well, I think we've covered a lot today. The essentials of GIT. Real-world applications, even a bit of the philosophy behind it.
It's been fun.
Huge thanks to you, our listener, for sending in your question and sparking this conversation. Keep those questions coming.
Keep learning and keep creating.
That's a perfect way to end it. Until next time, everyone, stay curious.